Okay, this video I'm going to try to explain um, a very important concept in note mapping, and that is that the same note, let's say for instance an A4 or A3, uh, can be mapped differently. The exact same note can be mapped differently, and depending on which mapping you choose, that will affect how different chords interpret that phrase. Okay, what does that exactly mean? Okay, well, let's take a look at this phrase I selected. Um, let's start with a C major 7th chord. That's where I started creating this phrase. What I wanted to do was to have like a couple of neighbor notes start on the 1. In other words, play the tonic of a major 7th chord, and then just have go up a semitone, go back to the tonic, go down a semitone, go back to the tonic, and then just drop down from the tonic. Just drop down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the 5th. Okay, so let's hear what that sounds like. Okay, very musical phrase, certainly. Okay, and we've got essentially two embellishments. These neighbor tones uh, are embellishing the tonic note, and then we just have a little run down to the going down to the 5th. So you could call this measure another embellishment. So essentially, we've got a phrase which goes from 1 down to 5, which is a strong harmonic movement. Okay? All right. Now let's take a look at the specific note mapping that exists in this phrase. So we start with the 1. Well, that's clear. And if we go up here, we see it's a chord tone. It's mapped to number 1. The next note, this 16th note, is the number 1 plus a semitone. Okay, so here you see we just have a simple offset of 1 semitone, and so that's clear enough. Then we go back to the 1, then we go to this B, and this one is mapped as a semitone below the 1. Okay, clear enough. Then 1, we have on the second beat, we have a quarter note. All right, that's pretty simple. Now we have this run going down, but this run, this B flat, A flat, G. This can actually be we can map this in different ways, but from a music theory standpoint, what we're really doing is just we're moving down from the 1 by semitone down to the 3. In other words, from the tonic down to the 3rd note of the chord, which would be the 5th. That's what we're doing from a musical theory standpoint. So what we're really doing is we're moving chromatically down, and that's what we've got to do in the phrase. We've got to create a phrase that is going to move chromatically down. Okay, so the first note that when we go from 1 down to the we go from C down to the G, our first semitone is 4. Okay, now that 4 is the 4th note of the chord, so that actually is not correctly mapped, because we don't really want to play necessarily the 4th note of a chord. What we want to play is the tonic, the C, minus one semitone with a semitone offset, because that's essentially what the run is, okay? So we have to actually, instead of this being a 4, we want to change that to a 1. And now it drops down because of the octave offset. So let's bring it back up, okay? And then we can go to the semitone and drop it down 1/2 step. So we have the same exact B, but instead of being mapped to the 4th note of a chord, in a 7th chord that would be B, or A, E, G, B, we just want to map it as an offset to the 1. That's going to give us a correct interpretation of this chromatic run, for want of a better term. Okay? Now here we've got the same problem. This note, this B flat is mapped to the 4th tone, and we don't want that. Okay? So again, we have to choose number 1. We have to remove the octave offset, and then we go down 2 semitones. Okay? All right. And we can see it says 1 minus 2. Then we'll do the same thing here with the A. Change it to 1. Remove the octave offset. Go down 3 semitones. And then on the A flat or G sharp, map it to 1. Remove the octave offset. Go down 4 semitones. Okay? So as you can see, these 4 notes are all mapped to the 1, which is the C. 1 minus a semitone, 1 minus 2 semitones, 1 minus 3 semitones, 1 minus 4 semitones, and then the 3. So let's hear that. Okay, so we hear exactly the same phrase as we heard before, even though we changed the mapping on these 4 notes here. Okay, we changed the mapping because all these 4 notes were mapped to the 4th tone of the chord. Okay, now that'll make a difference when we have a 7th chord has a 4th tone, but a triad doesn't. So let's see what happens with this mapping when we go to a major, just C major. Okay, guess what? Nothing has changed, and that's what I was after actually. So if I play this, nothing changes. Okay, what if I do a C major? Sorry. If I do a C major 6, same thing. Nothing changes. Okay? Now, let's find out what happens if we don't map it to the 1, but instead we map it to the 4. So this would be 4. Whoops. Let me go back there. So I'll select this note, and I'm going to drag it down to the B. And that's the 4th. Having a little trouble here. Bear with me. Okay, so I see. I didn't change it to a major 7th chord. That's why I was having trouble. Okay. Alright, there we go. Now it's mapped to the 4. You have to watch what chord you're mapped to up there, or you'll really start scratching your head. Okay, so we have the 4, and on the B, instead of being mapped to 1 minus a semitone, it's just mapped to 4, which is the 4th note of a G7 chord. So then I'll move this down, and this is 4 minus 1. So now what it's doing, it's not mapping relative to the 1 note, the tonic. It's mapping relative. We're telling the program to play a note that's 1 semitone below the 4th note of a chord, of a G7 chord, which is B. Okay? You're starting to see the difference here? Now, look at this. I dragged this note down, and what's happened? Now it's the program, the software is mapping to the 5th. Okay? It's mapping to the 5th, and it's mapping up on this A, it's mapping up a scale step. Okay? So you've got to handhold Rapid Composer and tell it the way you want to map it. And that's the whole point of this video, what I'm trying to get at. So we want to change this to 4 and then bring it down. Remove this octave offset, right? Let's see, we're changing it to 4. We want 4 minus 2, right? 4 minus 2. We're going to make this scale step 0. It's very finicky. And, okay, this is 4 minus 14. So what happened here? We, oh. Okay, wait a minute. 4 plus 1. Let's remove that. 4 minus 1. 4 minus 2. Okay, there we go. I got it. All right, and then we'll change this to 4 minus 3. So we'll click 4. Go down. There we go. Okay, now we've remapped it. So instead of these notes being mapped to the 1, in other words, this before we had it 1 minus 1 semitone, 1 minus 2 semitones, 1 minus 3 semitones, 1 minus 4 semitones. Now we've got this mapping where we're playing on this note, this 16th note, we're playing the 4th note of a chord, and then we're offsetting that by 1 semitone down, 2 semitones down, 3 semitones down. The G remains the same. Okay? So if we play this, we hear exactly the same thing. But here's where things get interesting. When we change chords, we get something new. Okay, let's go back to the major 7th again. So with the major 7th, on the 3rd beat, we drop down to B. But when we play a triad, okay, it doesn't drop down. And also notice that here we have on this 4 minus 3, we have an A and not an A flat. Whereas with the major 7th chord, okay, we had an A flat. We had a pure chromatic move down from the B, down from the C, chromatically moving down by step to the G. Okay, but when we put this phrase on top of a triad, a C major triad, we get a different result. That's the whole point. I know this is, it might seem nitpicky, but in fact, this is really an important point, because these phrases can sound very, very musical when they're placed on different chords, but that to some extent is going to depend on how they're mapped. So the mapping is important, and sometimes you'll create a phrase which sounds really good on one chord, but then you move it to a seventh chord or some other chord, and it doesn't sound right. And what's happening probably has something to do with this type of mapping. Okay, so there's no hard and fast rule about these things. I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is that when you create phrases, or when you take a phrase that you find that you like, and you try to transfer it to Rapid Composer so you can use this phrase again, you might very well be running into these kind of complex mapping issues. And you've really got to kind of sit down and think about it musically. Remember, as I said, the first thing I did was look at this phrase, and essentially what we had was a tonic moving down to the fifth, the one moving down, the C moving down to the G. And these notes here were, basically kind of a run. That's what our ear was hearing. It was just basically a simple run, a chromatic run down from one note down to another. Okay, so I guess I'm suggesting that when you map these notes in creating a phrase, that you kind of think of the phrase in terms of what you're doing musically, and maybe that will, maybe that's like at least a partial key to creating good phrases and malleable phrases that are going to work with other harmonies. Because this idea of this phrase is, should work with, you want this to work with just about any chord. I mean, you're moving from the 1 down to the 5th, and you have a chromatic move from the 1 to the 5th. I mean, that basic idea would be fairly, would be a piece of cake for any pianist to execute. But when you're asking Rapid Composer to replicate that, it's not quite that simple. Okay? All right. In any event, let's save this. What was our group? I forget our name of group. I keep forgetting that. Let's see. We're saving these in chord note mapping. That's our folder. Okay. Chord note mapping. So group is chord note mapping. By the way, maybe I'm doing something wrong here, but it would be nice if this group box, this text box here, like save the different directories you're working with, because as you can see, like I forgot exactly what folder I created for these tests, but maybe I'm doing something wrong. There is this icon here. I'm a little confused by that. In any event, if you kind of have an idea about that, put it in the comments. All right, so we're going to call this, what should we call this? Let's say 1-5 chromatic down. Okay. 1-5 chromatic down. Okay. So we'll save that. Okay, so let's see what happens in our progression up here. Delete this. And there's our phrase. So and then we just go here. We go fill with 1/5 chromatic down. There we go. So let's hear what we've got. We've got all 1 chords here. We've got a major 7th, a 6th, a major 9th, and a plain triad. Okay, well, interestingly, the only chord where the phrase changed was the 6th chord. Okay? Yep. And we could analyze that if we go back to the phrase editor and we look at a major 6. Let's see what happened here. Why did it drop down this 4 minus 3? So the 4, well, here's the answer. It's pretty simple. In a major 6 chord, the 4 is not the B, the 4 is the A. So this phrase, the way our phrase goes with this mapping, where we're mapping to the 4, the 4th note of the chord, that's A. So we get a chromatic run down from the A 4 notes, which brings us below the G, brings us to G flat. So actually, this is a perfect example of what I was trying to illustrate, that the note mapping is just a big key to making these phrases. Okay? So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.